All right, we are live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris, and this is my channel. We love comics, and I wanted to do my review of Dark Phoenix, which I saw just the other day. And just in case you don't see it on the screen, and I'm leaving it there so this way no one can be surprised, this is going to be a spoiler review because you basically have to mention stuff to really give something a honest review and be able to point things out that you either like or don't like about a movie. So if you haven't seen it and you don't want anything spoiled, you may want to watch this another time. But like I said, I will be keeping this screen up. So this way, especially if you have something to do, you could just listen. Or if you're in the chat, you can have a conversation. And like I want to always mention, when it comes to any review, you may agree, you may disagree. This is just my opinion. So you don't have to hate or love me based on what I say. Just respect the fact that I'm just giving my opinion of what I saw. So with that, there's already enough people in here, which I always love, that I could literally do a video with 2 minutes notice and plenty of people come in. So let me just say hello to a couple people before I start the review. It also gives people a chance to get in here. Join in and have a conversation in the chat, or if you want, I have telepathy. You're first, so there you go. You've made it to #1. Welcome. Michael is here. Florence, Richard, Pedro, Robotech, Super Mario, Huma, Luke, Pedro, Jerry, Solly to Kings, Russ, Collector, Unruly Simeon, Constipated in Sin City. I love that name. Scott, Gary, Comic Addiction. Not sure if I said your name, but just in case. And many others. Richard, hello. I don't want to do too many because I want this to go straight into the review. So again, if you don't see it, on the bottom of the screen you see spoiler. It's also in the title. So if you're listening at this point, you either don't care or you've already seen it. Okay. So the first thing I want to say is there was a lot of negative reviews on this movie, saying it's the worst X-Men movie ever. I watched it, and if it wasn't for the reshoots, I would have had to have agreed with a lot of people. Now, is this Endgame level? Not a chance. Is it, you know, Captain America from like the 80s or the Fantastic Four movie from the 80s? No, it's not that bad. I honestly think it's watchable, but it has some cringe moments, things that don't make sense. So I will say right off the bat, because of the reshoots at the end, basically the whole train scene at the end, from what people are saying, was reshot. They added that in. And it seems like the first part of the movie was the part most people are not going to like. The second part went pretty well, and you could see the reshoots definitely turned it into something a little bit better. So I want to address the main reason that people are not going to love this movie. And again, and I've warned about this, and it's going in this direction, whether you want to hear it or not, we have to discuss the reality of what's happening these days. And why it just doesn't make sense, and they throw in these agendas. And that's the scene where Jennifer Lawrence, her character Mystique, or Raven, whichever you want to call her, I always loved her as, well, not Jennifer Lawrence's version, but I love the original Mystique, who's meant to be a villain. But whether you love her as a hero or villain, that has nothing really to do with this part. But here's the scene that most people are talking about. And I wanted to watch the movie before I jumped to judgment to make sure, to see if it actually fit the narrative, which unfortunately it does not. There's a scene very early in the movie where you see, and Fox actually put a clip out about this, so this is something that's already out there. But Jennifer Lawrence, after a mission in the beginning of the movie, where they save some people on a shuttlecraft, Jennifer Lawrence goes to Charles Xavier and basically, after a little rant, says, you know, there's a lot of women saving the men around here. You should change the name to X-Women. Now, here's the part where that doesn't make sense at all. Because when you watch the beginning scene opens up where basically Charles Xavier gets a call from the president saying that one of their space shuttle missions, there's a problem, they're stuck in outer space, and they ask the X-Men to go and save them. Okay? Now, the X-Men all go into their craft and go up and try and rescue all of the people. Now, the main people that are going from their ship onto the space shuttle to save all the astronauts is Nightcrawler, Quicksilver, and Jean Grey. All the others stay on the X-Men ship. So 2 of the 3 that are going to save the astronauts are male. Okay? Now, of all 3, Nightcrawler does the most of the work. Now, Quicksilver basically gathers everybody together to make it easier. And Nightcrawler is the one that basically zaps them all over. Now, at that point, they think they got all of the cosmonauts or astronauts or whatever, only to find out that there is the captain, still on another part of the ship. So they have to rescue him, but they're basically saying there's this, what they were saying, what looked like the basically Galactus cloud, only in red and yellow, coming at them. They didn't know what it was at the time. So they had about 10 seconds to find the person. So Nightcrawler gets Jean Grey to go over because she can hold the ship together so it doesn't explode, while Nightcrawler finds the other person, saves them. She ends up getting zapped by this, what ends up ultimately becoming the Phoenix Force. Nightcrawler goes and saves her. So, did Jean Grey make the mission better? Absolutely. She had to hold the ship together. She played a part. Well, most of them, like Raven herself, was sitting in the spaceship doing nothing. But 2 of the 3 characters that were doing most of the work were men. So and that's where that Jennifer Lawrence scene ends up, right after that, where they come back and they're mad that they almost died, and basically, throughout the movie, they make Charles Xavier look like an incompetent, borderlining evil character. But that's where she goes in and says, women are doing a lot of saving the men. Well, did she forget that Nightcrawler's the one that brought all of the astronauts onto the ship? They forget the fact that Quicksilver went onto the ship as well to gather them all together so they can be taken away? Did they forget the fact that, yes, Jean Grey held the ship together, but it was Nightcrawler who brought her back so she didn't die in outer space? Or potentially die? So the scene doesn't make sense. And that's where you could see where, time and time again, they throw in this political agenda, and it's just for the purpose of putting it there. Now, if it was something where it was relevant to the story, most people would not have a problem with it. But when you shoehorn something in just to say, hey, we're putting our feminist card into this movie or our TV show or whatever they put it out as, and it doesn't fit the story, it takes you out of the realm of the fantasy that it's supposed to bring you. Movies are supposed to be an escape. That's why people like comic book movies. Nobody goes to comic book movies, as far as I believe, for the realism. Because I'm sure not many of you have had fights with Superman because he is a cartoon, he is a comic book character. So nobody is going there thinking these are going to be documentaries. They're going to escape reality and have a little fun in their lives, considering how much divisive nature there is these days. So when you put in a political agenda or a feminist agenda or any kind of agenda where it's so blatantly obvious and doesn't make sense into the story, it causes people to get out of that moment of disbelief. And now instead of focusing or enjoying the movie, you're now taking yourself out of it to question that particular moment. There was even a scene like that in Endgame. There's been a lot of scenes like that lately. You see what's happening with the Batwoman trailers and a lot of other things. And yes, I have telepathy. I hate to tell you that Superman is not real. But you never know. In alternate universes, maybe there really is a Superman. Who knows? So I cannot verify whether that's true or not. Okay, so we get out of that scene. And the main thing about the beginning of the movie is it's very slow. It doesn't really go anywhere. Because all of a sudden, Jean Grey, now all of a sudden, she gets very thirsty. and needs to drink a lot at a party, which, by the way, is the moment you get to see Dazzler. And I had a feeling they were going to do this when they said that. It was another one of those moments where you had a character that was there for a few seconds. At first, I'm like, where's the singing coming from? Because they show a scene where the younger ex people, shall we say, are kind of having a little party in the woods at the mansion. So you see Dazzler there for a second, basically being the DJ/radio. So I thought that was a cool moment, but that was basically an Easter egg for comic fans. If you're not a comic fan, you would have no idea who that was. Because they don't call her by name, they don't introduce her, you'll have no way of knowing unless you're a comic book fan. So that's another bad job in introducing a character, even if it was for a split second, and not letting people who don't know about these movies as much as a comic book collector would to understand who that character was. They basically just saw a person, singing. I thought it was an interesting moment, but it doesn't shock me that they only shoehorned her in for a 30-second clip. But at this scene, Jean Grey all of a sudden gets a little thirsty, and the next thing you know, every scene is her saying, I can't control this and bad things will happen. And the problem is the movie is done to the point where you don't have time to get to know the characters. You don't get to understand the situation. It's just, here's a moment, situations happen. Here's another moment, situations happen. There's no fluidity. She goes from saying to, Scott Summers, how much she'll never leave him and they love each other, to all of a sudden, less than 20 minutes later, attacking the X-Men. It just doesn't make sense to where they would be that quick. And ultimately, in this scene, and it was probably, I'm sure a lot of people were very happy about this, that is the scene that you basically get spoiled in the trailers, where Raven, Jennifer Lawrence's character, ends up getting killed. And I was actually very happy about it. Her part in this was all about the man bashing. She looked so disinterested. She had no charisma at all. She was basically just there to say how evil and bad and how selfish Charles Xavier was. So she dies early in the movie, which basically makes her a MacGuffin. What that is the reason to carry on with the story. So that's where all of a sudden now she's seen as the bad guy. Or the bad girl. Now, Charles Xavier wants to save her, but ultimately what happens is they shoehorn in Magneto because Phoenix, for some reason, Jean Grey goes to see him and wants to see if he can help her because all of a sudden she can't control it and she's hurting people. And she wants to know, well, you used to kill people. How did you stop doing it? And then all of a sudden, he's like, well, where'd that blood come from? Because she's got blood on her shirt. And they even show a scene after she kills Raven. Now, the way she kills Raven is she basically uses her force to shoot her probably 20 or 30 feet into a bunch of spikes. Now, how that blood got 20 feet away and splattered onto her shirt, I don't know. But again, it takes you out of the moment because you don't think about that because there would have been no way that blood would have shot on her the way it did. But they used it for a reason to have Magneto in and cause a little tension. But she doesn't answer the question, and he's basically trying to get the Phoenix Force out of her to see what happens. Next thing you know, the military is there. How they found out where she was, nobody knows, because at this point, even Charles Xavier says he no longer can read her mind because she's too powerful, and yet the military could find her within 15 minutes. Go figure. Again, taking you out of the story. So then she shows some of her evil moments where you see that helicopter scene in the trailer, and then basically Magneto says, go away. She flies away. And that's where she gets in touch with this new alien race. First of all, I challenge anybody to let me know, number one, what the name of the alien race is, and number two, the name of any of the characters playing the alien race. They are so much a waste of time. They don't tell you anything about them that Victor says GPS. Well, I guess if she had a GPS chip in her, I can understand that, but GPS doesn't work by tracking a human being, at least as far as I know of. But you never know. But these aliens are basically, and this is the part where, again, it doesn't make sense. Basically, the motivation of these aliens is the Phoenix Force itself destroyed their planet. And they wanted to either seek revenge by destroying the Phoenix or being able to absorb it so they can recreate their world. It was kind of hard to tell their motivation. But they finally come to Earth. They end up being shapeshifters. Originally, they said it might have been the Skrulls, but because the Skrulls were used in Captain Marvel, they changed it to another alien race form, but you don't know anything about them at all because they put no time in it at all other than, here's the bad guys. Look, because they're menacing. So the one, of course, female leader of these alien races is trying to befriend Jean Grey in hopes to end up ultimately getting the Dark Phoenix Force from her. Now, she almost achieves this at one point with a battle that just doesn't make sense. Ultimately, they find out where she is. Now, there's another part I forgot. After Raven dies, there's supposedly now a love connection between Beast and Mystique, or Raven. Now, one would know that if they watched the, which movie was it? X-Men Days of Future Past, but it was a deleted scene where you see Raven and the Beast hook up. But that was a deleted scene, so unless you saw that, you would have no idea about this. They don't really ever focus on the fact that they're a couple, but we're just meant to assume, oh, by the way, these two are a couple. So after Raven gets killed, the character that plays the Beast, again, making Charles Xavier look like he's an incompetent fool, starts yelling and screaming when he finds out that basically to protect Jean Grey from her past, he kind of blocked some memories so they wouldn't trigger her to try and help her. He did it with good intention. He wasn't trying to be a jerk. He was hiding things that would have traumatized her. Because when she was traumatized, it shows early in her childhood, she couldn't control herself and bad things would happen. So he thought the safest thing to do is block those memories so they wouldn't trigger events that would cause harm to people. You'd think he was doing a good thing. But basically, the character that plays the Beast is basically saying, how could you do that? You better admit you're wrong. He ultimately leaves and joins Magneto to kill Jean Grey. This is what they've done to the X-Men. They wanted to turn Charles Xavier into basically, they makes it seem like he's an idiot, that he's selfish, that he's egotistical, that he's doing it just for the medals and, the praise by the president. And they make him out to be the bad guy. So there ultimately ends up a fight scene where the Beast and Magneto find out where Jean Grey is. Again, they're super good at finding people within a 5-minute ratio. And there's a little battle between Charles Xavier's X-Men who want to save her and Magneto's now group, which includes Beast, who want to kill her. And at one point you see an okay little battle between them, but they don't really show their powers. And all of a sudden you see Magneto putting his fingers to the ground. You see the ground shaking. I'm like, all right, he's very powerful. We've seen in Apocalypse what he can do with, metals coming from the earth. It looks like something cool's about to happen. And he ends up pulling up a subway train from the ground, which I thought, all right, I guess this is the train scene that they've all been talking about. But what is he going to... Why would they be riding in a train that he just ripped out of the ground? It wouldn't be something you were riding in, and in the trailers you see them clearly in a train that's being brought somewhere. So I'm like, all right, this doesn't make sense. But he ultimately pulled up this train, which looked visually cool, and dragged it behind him so when he walked into the building where Jean Grey was, no one could follow him. Now, there were cars and buses and other things all over the place. Why he needed to pick a vehicle that was all the way underground was nothing more than a visual effects thing. It made no sense to the story. And when you ultimately see how easy it was for Cyclops to get in by just cutting a hole through another part of the wall, that whole scene made no sense. And again, when things in a movie make no sense, it takes you out of the enjoyment. It makes you stop and think, all right, well, that's silly, or that doesn't fit, or that's dumb, and you're not enjoying the movie. So ultimately, within 2 seconds, it shows Magneto has no chance, and she's showing her powers and basically crushes his helmet. Could have crushed his skull, but they do the typical, I'm going to push you away thing. You ever notice when people that could easily kill somebody, when they get a main character, they end up not killing them? They just push them or throw them away. They always do that. It's annoying. It's frustrating, and it's something they do because obviously they don't want to kill the main characters that quickly. So ultimately, this ends up, now all of a sudden, the military comes in and basically laser tags everybody. So Magneto, Cyclops, Storm, Jean Grey, the Beast, all of them end up getting captured, and they're put in this now new train scene where they all have these collars that take away their powers. So they're all together. The aliens, which all of a sudden, now there's like 30 of them. How all of a sudden all these people got here, we have no idea. But basically, you know, they're shape-shifting aliens that look like humans. How original. So they find out that they're on the train, so they go into the train, and the first thing you see is, well, the military tries to stop them by shooting them, and basically they absorb the bullets like a Terminator would. Until they use a bigger caliber bullet, that seems to destroy them. So are they bulletproof or just small bulletproof? Which kind of was just weird. So ultimately, the X-Men and the good and bad work together. They defeat these aliens, except, of course, for the female who... the one thing I will say positive about that scene is the special effects look pretty good. They finally used the X-Men's powers. I mean, Storm finally got to use her lightning in a way that made her look powerful. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, Nightcrawler becomes a rampaging lunatic murderer and just literally starts stabbing people in the neck with his tail. He just goes crazy. I don't like the new character that's playing him. I like the original in X-Men 2, the guy who played Nightcrawler. I think he was just perfect because they made him into a more relaxed kind of... He was comfortable with himself, and he was more into the religious aspect. I kind of like the way they were going with that. This one, he just looks so weird, but, you know, that's just a personal preference. But all of a sudden, he goes on a rampage, and they kill all of them except for her and, like, 2 others. And then, basically, at the end, they end up... Magneto did a one cool scene where Storm uses her, I guess, wind powers and blows them all into one of the cars of the train. And Magneto slowly just crushes the train, killing most of the aliens. So they basically weren't a real threat. They weren't anything predictable. They weren't anything exciting or interesting. They were just put in there to say, hey, look, we have an antagonist. Because, like I said, no one's going to remember the aliens' names. No one's going to remember their alien race. No one's even going to know what they look like because they don't even get into it at all. No character development in this entire movie. So basically at the end you see the blonde hair, or the white-haired, I don't know if it's blonde or white, it's probably platinum blonde, the alien woman trying to take the Phoenix Force from Jean Grey, and she basically, quote-unquote, sacrifices herself by lifting this alien out into space where they explode, ultimately having her become the Phoenix Force. Which, by the way, for some strange reason, she was flying around the town where the X-Men are. Served no purpose. And ultimately, they renamed the school the Jean Grey School for Gifted Youngsters, and Charles Xavier retires. So basically, the first X-Men movie, the second X-Men movie, the Days of Future Past, all that stuff never ends up ultimately happening because, according to this movie, when Charles Xavier was basically in his, supposedly his 60s, even though he looked 30, because keep in mind, you know, Magneto was a child of World War II. So he was literally, because this was based in the 90s, he was in his 60s. And yet they used Michael Fassbender, I believe that's his name, and he looks like he's late 30s, early 40s. Doesn't look 60. So the characters don't even fit the ages they are supposed to be. But basically, they have it where Charles Xavier retires, gives up the school, and it now becomes the Jean Grey School, even though she's technically still alive. So this movie to me looks like it was thrown together. I can just imagine what this movie was before they did the reshoots. The only thing that saves this movie to make it even watchable, because like I said, it's not as bad as people think, but there's a lot of things that take you out of the moment. There's no character development whatsoever. They make Charles Xavier seem like an incompetent bad guy. I'm surprised they didn't turn him into the bad guy at the end, because they basically said either he didn't know what he was doing it for selfish reasons, or how dare you, it just took away who Charles Xavier was. Charles Xavier started the school because he was trying to help people that were different and be able to teach them that it's okay to be different, and to, instead of hiding your powers or being ashamed of who you are, to actually embrace it and become the hero instead of the mock child, or somebody who ends up being bullied all their time. They ultimately become a bully. And that's another one. Ben Fong says it well. They wasted Quicksilver. I mean, in Days of Future Past, what made Quicksilver was his moment when they basically did that freeze frame in the circular room in the Pentagon, in that, I guess, chef's table center, wherever it was, the cooking area. And he's doing his running around with the slow motion and the music. Everybody loved him. And ever since then, we haven't really seen him that much. Now, in the Apocalypse, they used him a little bit, but that was basically the same thing they did in the first movie, so they didn't really pick up anything original with him. And in this one, he was basically in the beginning, and then you don't see him again. He could have helped a lot. So there was no character development. Jennifer Lawrence was boring. She looked like she really didn't want to be there. Served no purpose, and her big line ultimately ends up not even making sense, because like I described in the beginning of this review, 2 of the 3 people that were doing all the saving in that particular part where she comes back and gets mad were men. So how is it all the women are always saving all the men to the point that justifies renaming it to X-Women? Which, by the way, a major, I don't know her name, but a major higher up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I don't know her name, was saying that the X-Men name is outdated and it may be time for a change. I'll tell you this much. If Marvel takes over X-Men and they call it X-People or X-Women or X-whatever, I will no longer watch it, just like I no longer watch Star Wars. I mean, let's put it this way. Is Wonder Woman outdated? She's a lot older than the X-Men. So should we have Wonder Person? See what I mean? You gotta have it go both ways. So Jester says it too. They did the same thing with Jubilee, cameos that waste her also. And I said that. And I love Jubilee. I loved watching the 90s X-Men cartoon. That's my version of my X-Men. Like, it's the Jim Lee version in the 90s. And they basically turned it into the X-Men cartoon. Like, I loved how they made Cyclops' outfit never look cooler than it did in the 90s when he had that yellow crossbar belt that went across his chest. I loved how he drew Rogue. That's my Rogue. That's what Rogue looks like. The Jim Lee version. And I loved Jubilee back then. She basically looked like a female Robin that could shoot fireworks. But to me, she was always a cool-looking character. And they didn't do anything with her in her cameo. They didn't use her at all in this movie. But they did the same thing with Dazzler, only basically they focused on her for 30 seconds instead of 15 seconds. And technically she didn't have a line, but she was singing. But it was so, today's music where everything's done with the vocal, whatever they call it, how they can alter people's voices to sound actually like good singers. It was just kind of silly and out of place, but, it was the cameo and probably the last time you'll see her, which is disappointing. So, overall, I think on a scale from 1 to 5, I would give this movie a 2.5 star. It's not as bad as people say. I mean, it's not like you're sitting there saying, I'm going to walk out. It's not cheesy. And like I said, the second half with the train scene, it does make it more enjoyable. But it's just like, here's a spot, here's a spot, here's a spot, here's a movie. It seemed like there was not enough time spent on any character development. Jean Grey, you don't know anything about her other than she can't control the powers and she's sad or angry. There's no kind of making you empathize, sympathize, or anything with her character. She goes from a person that's going to save people to all of a sudden somebody that's crying every 2 seconds or killing somebody every 2 seconds, doesn't know why, and just goes from place to place. You don't fall in love with her. You don't empathize, you don't sympathize, because you don't really learn anything more than that. There was no development of the characters. So in that sense, that's why out of 5 stars, 2.5 I think is fair. I wouldn't give this a 1 star because, yes, Richard, auto-tune, thank you for that, and Justice said it as well. I really think they just rushed this film. I basically think because of the fact that they maybe knew that Marvel and Disney were going to be taking over the X-Men, they were just like, why put the effort into this when we don't really have to? And even though the second half that they reshot made it better, it definitely didn't help the first half. The first half of this movie is 90% of the problem. But it is watchable. So would I recommend this? That's a tough call. If you could watch this for free when it comes out later, or rent it like as a Netflix view, I would do that. This is not a movie I would recommend spending your money on in the movie theater, but it's definitely one when it becomes a rental or something you could see on Netflix or something, then I would definitely recommend watching it and you could see for yourself. Me personally, I really get tired of the political agendas and the feminist agendas and stuff that are being placed in the movies. If you're going to do it, at least be smart enough for it to be making sense. You cannot have Jennifer Lawrence yelling at Charles Xavier that the women are saving all the men when 2 of the 3 people doing the saving in the scene before were men. I mean, if it was all the women that were saving all the men in that part, then yes, at least that would have made sense. I might not have liked it because I know the agendas that they're placing, but at least I would say, okay, Storm, maybe Rogue, or, Jean Grey and Raven, maybe they were the ones that all did the heroing while the guys sat there saying, oh, I don't know what to do. Then at least that part would make sense. But that's not what happened. She was literally having 2 out of the 3 characters that were doing all the saving men and making a statement that says all the women are saving the men, we should change it to X women. It just doesn't fit, it doesn't make sense, and it's just an obvious agenda plot that is getting very tiresome. And eventually people are going to stop watching movies. That's why you're seeing movies like this. They're going to probably lose money. So, it's that whole, get woke, go broke kind of scenario. But I guess they make so much money, they don't care. I mean, look at Disney. Disney is now about or very close to having the all-time biggest moneymaker. They're very close to the #1 spot with Avatar, which is another movie don't get me started about. It's basically cowboys and Indians with trees and blue people. Very tall Smurfs with tails, but that's a review for another time. But movies that are like the Ghostbusters reboot, are like Ocean's 12, like movies like this, people are getting tired, and they're just not going to give you their money. But Disney can take such a hit because they make billions of dollars on everything else that it doesn't really matter. That's why they keep doing it. There's an old definition called insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And when you see people making fun of people just because they have a difference of opinion, and businesses continually doing the same agenda over and over again, even though they see it becomes a financial failure time and time again, and they keep doing it, they're either insane or there's an agenda they're trying to pass on to the younger generation, because you tell a lie long enough, it becomes the truth. Keep ramming a certain thing down people's throats, it becomes their own vocabulary and basically lifestyle. Older people see through that. That's why you see a lot of the older generations having a noticeable problem about these things. A lot of the younger generation seems to not have as much of a problem because this is what they're used to. That's what programming is all about. So, again, I would give this 2 to 2.5 stars out of 5 maximum. It's a very forgettable film. It is not the worst film ever. I've definitely seen lots of films a lot worse than this. Luckily, the social justice agenda stuff was just a little bit in the beginning. That after that, I guess when they reshot, they didn't think about that because the teams actually work as a team. So you have male and female, both characters that are good and characters that are evil, that are actually working together instead of saying, hey, look, I'm a male, or hey, look, I'm a female, I'm better than you. So at least the second half got rid of that garbage. But that scene with Jennifer Lawrence, it had nothing to do with the story, and if they took it out, it wouldn't have changed the story one bit, and actually would have probably made it better, because people wouldn't have had that moment saying, oh, God, here we go again. And if you do that while you're watching a movie, it takes you out of the experience, which defeats the whole purpose of what the experience is. And most people, the reason that movies end up ultimately becoming successful is because they're what people want. And when you give people what they want, they will have other people go. They will go again. They will recommend the movie. But when things like this happen, yes, you're going to get some people. I mean, you can sell, like they say, you can sell an ice cube to an Eskimo if you're a good enough salesman or saleswoman. But you can't do it again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So that's why this movie will ultimately be a financial failure. Now, that won't stop these companies from continuing to do these slowly more and more SJW stuff. And Richard McDowell says, I disagree about Avatar. It's very relevant about climate change. Richard, all I'm going to say is please research climate change. It's not what you think the news is telling you all the time, but we're not going to get that into this here. If you want to believe in climate change, you absolutely have that right. If you want to thumb down my video because I disagree, that's perfectly fine. But all I will say is dig a little deeper about climate change, and you'll notice it's just something that happens as cycles of the Earth every couple of dozen thousand years to 100,000 years. We had a mini ice age during the American Revolution. That's why you see George Washington crossing the Delaware. It's all full of ice. They didn't have hairspray and all these supposed things. So, again, I'm not even going to get into that. Just research it. So, I mean, you can disagree about Avatar. It is what it is. So, this is about Dark Phoenix. So, my overall review, 2 to 2.5 stars out of 5. It's definitely a forgettable movie. It's one that you will not miss out on much if you don't see it. It's not as bad as some people are claiming it to be. The second half, it definitely makes the movie better, where they actually work together, but there is no story arc. There is no character development. And I would love to see one person in the comment section, without looking it up, telling me what the name of the race of the aliens were, or the name of any of those alien characters. If you have to look it up, then basically they didn't do their job. So the ending worked out to be okay. It's just not enough to make this movie something that's a must-see. So I would recommend waiting for it to come out to where you could watch it as a rental, watch it on Netflix or something like that. Brian says, weren't they Skrulls? They were supposed to originally be Skrulls, but they weren't. They ended up being another race. But again, you don't really know because they don't tell you. And if you don't know, that's bad story writing. Because you knew who Thanos was. He was an Eternal. He was from Titan. They did character development. You know a lot about Thanos. You know about his motivation. Whether you agreed or disagreed with his motivation, at least you knew about it. And here's another thing before I go. That they were very unafraid. Because one of the things was, Jean Grey, when he's popping from person to person, she's a little disappointed. Everybody's so afraid of her and her powers. Even she was afraid of it because she couldn't control it. And yet, the aliens, where this Phoenix Force destroyed their entire planet, are not afraid of her at all. Which makes no sense, because the very thing that they're trying to get from Jean Grey had the power to destroy their entire planet, and they're not afraid of the person who can't control it? That made no sense to me. Of all the people that should be afraid of the Dark Phoenix the most, it should be those aliens, because it destroyed the planet that they lived on. And it being in a person that can't control the power, which would make her unpredictable, which means, what if the Phoenix Force said, I had to destroy that planet for a reason, I sense a few of those aliens, I'm going to destroy them. but yet they're sitting there all cool, calm, and collective, like that Matrix moment with the bad guys all standing around. As a matter of fact, it reminded me of the Matrix 2, the scene where they're on the stairs. It looked like the exact scene in the beginning of the Matrix 2 where Neo is battling all those guys from the Frenchman, and they're battling up and down those rounded stairs on each side. That reminded me of that. So, bad staging there, because it made me think of another movie, which was definitely better than this one. So, I wouldn't recommend seeing it. It wasn't as bad as people said it was. I thought it was okay. They really need to stop focusing on the political and, feminist agenda stuff and just stick with the story. And if you're going to do it, at least make sense in the movie. If it's not making sense, it's going to take you away from the moment. Get some character development. You think with the millions of dollars these people get paid to do these movies, they would be able to find competent writers and producers who actually listen to what's going on and actually saying, okay, this isn't working, let's start it over. I mean, they reshot the whole second half. So you're telling me they couldn't have reshot a whole 2-minute scene? It seemed like they didn't care. So whether you like this review or not, I'll leave that up to you. Thumbs up will tell me you appreciated the review. Thumbs down will say you didn't like certain things in the video, and that will cause you to hate me. I'm used to that, so it doesn't matter. I want to thank people for listening, and share your opinions of the movie. And remember, you could totally be the exact opposite. I'm not going to hate you because you're different. I'm going to appreciate your point of view. Just do it in a way that's constructive. If you didn't like what I said, don't just say, well, I disagree. Tell me why you don't agree. Give us a reason to understand your point of view. If somebody just leaves a comment all the time saying, oh, I disagree with you here, or I disagree with what you say, but don't give their point of view, then you're not really helping people to learn anything different other than just being an antagonist. So don't be like this movie. Put out some information and do it in a way that's intelligent and intellectual and respectful, and not just cursing up a storm because somebody said something that triggered somebody into a tantrum. We don't want that here, and that's why 99.9% of my subscribers, I don't even have to worry about. So even my moderators, they never have to moderate anything, because the people that come here for the most part, that actually listen to the videos and not just come here to thumb them down, actually give honest, fair reviews. They don't always have to agree. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Give it a thumbs up if you appreciate it. Share it if you want other people to know about it. Let me know if you've seen the movie, what you thought, and what you thought of my honest review. And remember, it's just my opinion. You don't have to agree. So thanks for listening. New video will be coming out in the next couple of days. So hit the notification button. Don't forget that I also sell my comic books in the form of mystery boxes if you're interested in those. Don't forget also to sign up for the cashback program. Its links are in the description. And don't forget, it's not you. It is not I. It's We Love Comics. Have a great day.